Somewhere in the Arabian Sea, a clock is ticking. Not the kind of clock you can hear. Not the kind that counts down on a screen with a blinking red light. This is the kind of clock that exists only in the minds of military commanders. The invisible countdown between the moment a threat is detected and the moment it becomes catastrophic. And on this particular morning, that clock was running very, very fast. It is 4:47 in the morning. The Arabian Sea is black glass. A thin strip of burnt orange is just beginning to bleed along the eastern horizon. Fog moves in slow, ghostly ribbons across the surface of the water. If you were standing on the deck of any vessel out there, you would feel the kind of quiet that makes your chest tight. The kind of quiet that does not feel peaceful. The kind that feels like something is about to break it forever. And something was. 11 nautical miles to the southwest, moving at just under 12 knots, was a vessel that did not belong on any routine shipping manifest. It was large, angular, modified below the waterline for additional structural reinforcement. And above deck, if you had the right satellite imagery, if your thermal sensors were calibrated correctly, if your intelligence analysts had been doing their jobs for the past 72 hours without sleep, you could see them. Row after row of drone launch tubes. Dozens of them. Some analysts who later reviewed the footage said the number exceeded 300 individual launch positions. 300 UAVs, combat-armed, fueled, sitting in their tubes like loaded chambers in the world's most terrifying revolver. This was Iran's drone carrier. Not a concept, not a rumor passed between intelligence agencies. A real, operational, active weapon system floating in international waters, and it was closing in on the United States Navy's most powerful strike group in the region. Now, to understand why this was so uniquely dangerous, you have to understand what drone warfare has done to the rules of naval combat. For over a century, naval power was about tonnage, firepower, the size of your guns, the range of your missiles, the number of aircraft on your flight deck. Big ships with big weapons won wars at sea. That was the equation. That was the doctrine. Iran changed the equation. Starting in the early 2000s, Iran began investing heavily in asymmetric warfare. They looked at the United States Navy, the most powerful naval force in human history, and they asked themselves a very simple question. We cannot match them ship for ship. We cannot match them missile for missile. So how do we hurt them? And the answer they arrived at was this. You do not need to match their firepower if you can overwhelm their defenses. You do not need one devastating blow if you can deliver 100 simultaneous ones. You saturate. You swarm. You send so many threats at once that even the most advanced defense systems in the world cannot shoot them all down. That is exactly what this vessel was designed to do. A single Iranian combat drone, the Shahed series, for example, is not particularly impressive on its own. It is slow by fighter jet standards. Its radar signature is small, but not invisible. A competent air defense system can knock one down without breaking a sweat. But 100 of them? 200? Launched simultaneously from multiple vectors, flying low to avoid radar detection, programmed to target radar arrays, communication systems, and flight decks? That is a completely different problem. That is the kind of problem that keeps admirals awake at night. That is the kind of problem that has no clean solution, and Iran knew it. The drone carrier concept was the natural evolution of this strategy. Instead of launching drones from fixed land positions, which are stationary, detectable, and vulnerable to preemptive strikes, you put your drone force on a ship. You make it mobile. You make it unpredictable. You sail it into international waters, where the rules of engagement become complicated, where every decision to strike carries diplomatic consequences, where the window between detection and launch can close in minutes. It was, from a purely strategic standpoint, a genuinely brilliant and terrifying idea. Inside the U.S. Fleet's Combat Information Center that morning, nobody was using the word brilliant. They were using other words. Shorter words. Words that conveyed urgency. The vessel had been under surveillance for the past 3 days. Signals intelligence. Satellite passes every 90 minutes. A Virginia-class submarine running silent at depth, tracking her acoustic signature. Unmanned aerial vehicles flying at altitude, far enough away to avoid visual detection, but close enough to watch every movement on deck. The intelligence picture was detailed, current, and deeply alarming. Drone maintenance crews had been observed moving through the launch bays in the hours before dawn. Fuel lines were active. Power systems were cycling up. The thermal signature of the vessel had increased significantly over the past 4 hours, a sign that onboard systems were coming online, warming up, preparing for something. The watch officer who first flagged the escalating indicators did not waste time. He picked up the secure line and spoke 4 words that set the entire strike group in motion. They are going active. From that moment, the response was not improvised. It was not reactive. It was the product of years of planning, dozens of war game simulations, and the kind of institutional readiness that the United States Navy trains toward every single day. A pre-planned strike package existed for exactly this scenario. Target packages had been built and refined. Weapons had been assigned. Response had been allocated down to individual sailors at individual stations. All that was needed was the order. The order came. Across the strike group, the machinery of modern naval warfare began to move, with a precision that is genuinely breathtaking to witness. On the destroyer positioned at the northern edge of the formation, Tomahawk cruise missile launch sequences were initiated. The missiles sat in their vertical launch cells like patient, obedient instruments of consequence, waiting for the targeting data to lock, waiting for the moment their guidance systems would commit to a flight path and begin calculating the most efficient route to a vessel 11 miles away. On the carrier, aircraft that had been sitting at readiness condition 1, fully fueled, weapons loaded, pilots strapped in, received updated mission briefs in real time. Electronic warfare aircraft powered up their jamming suites. A flight of F/A-18 Super Hornets was cleared for immediate launch. On the Iranian vessel, something had changed in the last 6 minutes. The first drone appeared above the deck rail at 5:03 a.m., then a second, then a third. The launch sequence had begun. Slowly, at first, a trickle of UAVs climbing away from the vessel, their small electric motors barely audible over the sound of the ocean. But the trickle was accelerating. The intelligence analysts, watching the live feed from altitude, counted 7 airborne, then 15, then 23. The swarm was forming. The attack was underway. Simultaneously, 11 miles away, the first Tomahawk missile cleared its launch cell. There is something almost philosophical about a Tomahawk in flight. It travels at roughly 550 miles per hour, which sounds fast until you consider that a fighter jet can do twice that speed. It is not the fastest weapon in the American arsenal. It is not the most explosive. What makes it extraordinary is its precision. It does not approximate a target. It does not estimate. It navigates. It thinks. It adjusts in real time. And on this morning, it had been assigned a very specific destination. Not the hull of the Iranian vessel, not the waterline, not the bridge. The drone hangars, the launch infrastructure, the fuel and power systems that kept those UAVs operational. The intent was not to sink the ship. The intent was to make it incapable of threatening anyone. The Tomahawk covered 11 nautical miles in just under 72 seconds. The first impact hit the forward launch bay at 5:04 a.m. and 41 seconds. The explosion was catastrophic within a localized area, drone fuel igniting in a chain reaction that moved through the launch infrastructure like a wave. Secondary explosions followed within seconds as armed UAV warheads cooked off in the heat. The forward section of the vessel disappeared into a column of black and orange fire that rose 200 feet above the waterline. The second missile hit the aft hangar 12 seconds later. By the time the third impact registered, a standard missile launched from the destroyer targeting the vessel's radar and communications array, the Iranian drone carrier had ceased to function as a coherent weapons platform. The drones that had managed to launch, number somewhere between 20 and 30, according to later assessments, were now flying without coordinated guidance. Their targeting data was corrupted. Their communication link to the vessel's control systems was severed. They became, in the language of naval warfare, autonomous and disoriented. Still dangerous in a general sense, but no longer a coordinated swarm. No longer the overwhelming, synchronized attack they had been designed to execute. The Carrier Air Wing's electronic warfare aircraft moved to intercept the airborne drones. CIWS systems on the destroyer and the carrier began engaging. The engagement lasted approximately 4 minutes. When it was over, every airborne Iranian UAV had been destroyed. Not one reached a U.S. vessel. On the bridge of the carrier, the strike group commander looked at the damage assessment coming in from every sensor platform in the formation. He read it once. He read it again. Then he set it down and said nothing for a long moment. In under 10 minutes, a weapons system that had been designed to overwhelm and potentially cripple the most powerful naval strike force in the world had been reduced to a burning wreck listing 7 degrees to starboard in the Arabian Sea. The world found out several hours later. The Iranian government's initial response was silence, which in diplomatic terms is the loudest possible answer. State media eventually acknowledged an incident involving a naval vessel, but provided no details and no casualty figures. Western intelligence agencies noted a significant increase in encrypted communications traffic between Tehran and its regional proxy networks in the hours following the strike. The digital equivalent of a command structure trying to understand what had just happened and recalibrate accordingly. In Washington, there were no press conferences, no victory speeches. No one stood in front of cameras and declared triumph. The official statement from the Pentagon was 4 sentences long and said almost nothing. But in the corridors of the E-ring, in the secure conference rooms where decisions of this magnitude are processed and analyzed, there was a very clear understanding of what the morning had demonstrated. It had demonstrated something that Iran had spent 20 years trying to disprove. That asymmetric advantage, the swarm, the saturation, the drone mass, while genuinely threatening, was not invincible. That the United States Navy had watched, studied, war-gamed, and prepared for exactly this scenario. That the window between a threat going active and a threat being neutralized could be measured in seconds when the intelligence was good enough and the response was rehearsed enough. But let us be honest with ourselves, because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves celebration. The strike worked because the intelligence was exceptional. It worked because the U.S. Navy had continuous surveillance on that vessel for 72 hours before the moment of crisis. It worked because a Virginia-class submarine was already in the water, tracking the acoustic signature. It worked because pre-planned strike packages existed and were updated regularly. Remove any one of those variables, and the morning could have unfolded very differently. The drones could have been airborne for 3 minutes before detection. The strike could have been delayed by 10 minutes of additional authorization requirements. The targeting data could have been 6 hours old instead of 6 minutes old. The margin was not comfortable. The margin was real, but it was not comfortable. And that is the lesson that serious military analysts took from this engagement. Not that the United States won, not that Iran lost, but that the nature of naval warfare has fundamentally and irreversibly changed, and that the side which understands that change most completely and prepares for it most rigorously will be the side that survives the next engagement. Drone warfare is not the future of conflict at sea. It is the present. It is happening now. Iran is not the only nation that has invested in this capability. The Arabian Sea is not the only body of water where this equation is being calculated. Every major naval power on Earth watched what happened that morning and drew their own conclusions. Every defense contractor building the next generation of close-in weapon systems noted the engagement parameters. Every naval war college updated its curriculum. The Iranian drone carrier burned for 11 hours before it finally went beneath the surface. The fires were visible from 40 miles away. Sailors on the deck of the carrier watched the glow on the horizon long after the tactical picture had been resolved and the threat assessment had returned to routine. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a moment like that. Not the silence of the ocean before dawn, a different kind. The silence of people who understand what they just participated in, who understand that decisions made in seconds have consequences that stretch across years, who understand that somewhere, in the debris field spreading across the surface of the Arabian Sea, The calculus of regional power has shifted in ways that will not be fully understood for a long time. One strike, one morning, one decision made in a matter of minutes by men and women who had trained their entire professional lives for exactly that moment. This is what modern naval warfare looks like. This is what it sounds like when the most powerful navy in human history responds to an existential threat with precision, speed, and absolute commitment. And this is why the Arabian Sea, on this particular morning, became a classroom that the entire world was forced to attend. If this story reached something in you, if you want to understand more about how the battles being fought right now are shaping the world you live in, then you already know what to do. Subscribe, turn on notifications, because the next engagement is already being planned somewhere. And when it happens, you want to understand exactly what you are watching. This is modern naval warfare at its most extreme, and we are just getting started.